Hey folks, welcome back to the Frontier Western Heritage Channel. I'm Todd Kessner and I'm out here at the gun range again outside of Bozeman, Montana. And had planned on wrapping up the pocket pistol series that we've been doing, the power of various pocket pistols. And I was going to wrap that up with the last video that got posted, that 1862 Colt Police. But then some of you folks had written in saying, well, when you shot the .32 caliber gun, you ought to try 4F powder. And so I thought about that and thought, well, I might give that a try. Maybe 4F powder would be able to fit in that .32 caliber Smith and Wesson cartridge. And so I thought I would go ahead and give that a try. So if you watch the first Smith and Wesson .32 that I fired, that particular video, the box that I have, it's original box from the 1800s of the black powder, would have had black powder ammo in it. It said that you could put 10 grains in that cartridge. That was the factory load, was 10 grains. And I could not get 10 grains in without so much compression that I bulged some of the cases with 3F powder. So I thought, well, hey, maybe with 4F we'll be able to get 10 grains in there, and that would have been the secret. So that's what I decided to try, and decided to do one more of these pocket pistol videos just to try that 4F black powder. So as a very quick reminder, and if you've seen those other videos you would have seen this already, but in 1865 Smith and Wesson came out with this was called the Smith and Wesson Model 1.5, and it is a top break gun, so it's a tip up they would have called them, and it takes this .32 caliber copper cased, this is an original .32 caliber copper cased cartridge in rimfire. If I can get that in my fingers right, there we go. So it's a copper case in a .32 rimfire, and that's what the early Smith and Wessons in the tip-up were all about. And the problem with the tip-up was what held this whole entire barrel steady is this little hinge on top. And so when I close that, it locks in. If this hinge, and I got quite a bit of barrel wiggle on this one unfortunately, and that's the way a lot of them are. That hinge is not particularly strong, and if it's a pocket pistol, if you put it in your back pocket, sat down once and bent it, you're out of business. And so they wiggle. So not a super strong action, but very popular gun that came out in 1865 because of the metallic cartridge that was put in it rather than having to load from the front of the cylinder. However, you'd have to take the cylinder off and you would load 5 cartridges in the back, and then this piece right here is nothing more than to knock your cartridges out. You'd reload, drop your cylinder back in, and then you could close her up and have 5 more rounds. So relatively weak, but also extremely convenient because of the metallic cartridge in rimfire. So this went all the way up until 1875, and then the next Smith and Wesson that came out in the same caliber is what they called the Smith and Wesson 1.5 single action. And this came out in 1878, so it eventually replaced the 1.5 that was a tip-up. And the big difference is we've got a break top revolver here that's very, very easy to load. And now we've got a central fire system that's a stronger case, and supposedly had a little more energy to it, but really between the two they're very, very minimal. It's just that this one is central fire, a little more reliable than the old rim fires, and so the reliability is really what sold this gun. So I tried to put 10 grains of 4F in these things, just like the box had said it would take 10 grains. And with 4F, it's such a fine powder, I thought, well, it'll be dense, it'll pack well, and I'll get the 10 grains in. So I tried everything. I mean, I dropped it through the 2-foot drop tube to try to filter that out and have it lay consistent, you know, in the cartridge, and give me a little space, and I had just a little bit of space. And then I tried to compress it so that I could get the bullet in it. And I had all kinds of problems. One of the cases was weak enough that it burst. Another case, I turned it into what looked like a little short stubby bottleneck. The top was .32 caliber. I don't know what the bottom was. It was a lot wider. So it looked like just like a bottleneck cartridge. Another case, I domed the bottom out, so when I set the cartridge on a flat tabletop, it wobbled all over the place because the bottom had domed out. And this is with balloon head cases that would take the most powder of any of them. So I just kind of quit the idea that I'm going to get 10 grains in this thing. I don't know what they did that they did on that box, what kind of powder they're using to get 10 grains. I'm just destroying cases trying to do it. So today we're going to go back to our break open Smith and Wesson 1.5 single action, and we're going to try the new cartridges. What I settled on with the balloon head cases that take a little more powder, with 4F I could get 8 into it and feel comfortable that I'm not bulging the case or doming out the bottom where the primer fits. And the cartridge sits flat on the surface. I can shoot that. So the old-fashioned balloon head cases that would take a little more powder, I got 8 grains of 4F Goex in. And then I'm going to test the solid head cases, and I've got some of those. It looks exactly the same from the outside, but my solid head cases wouldn't hold the same amount of powder, so I had to drop it down to 7 grains. So I'm shooting 8 grains of 4F. In the balloon head case, I'm shooting 7 grains of 4F in this solid head case, much stronger case, but could not get the 10 in. So we're going to test it at 8 and at 7 since I got them loaded, and let's see if 4F powder provides any more velocity than what I was using with 3F. Okay, let's load her up and see what we got. Is this last reading? Well, it has been a little while since I shot that last video with the black powder cartridge that was 3F, and so it's hard to remember exactly. This seemed pretty darn stout, so if nothing else, it felt like this 4F that it's compressed, but I didn't compress it so hard that it turned into a giant pellet in there, and that's kind of what happened to the 3F stuff. But it feels like this 4F is actually got quite a bit of little punch to it as far as recoil goes. I'll have to go back and figure out the difference to see if how they compare with velocities and things with the same bullet. But yeah, this thing's got a little bit of pop to her, and maybe I'm just not remembering correctly. But let's throw in 5 more of these things that have the solid head case with the 7 grains of 4F Goex, and see how they compare. All right, let's finish this thing up and see how we're doing here. So far, the indications look to me like we have dropped velocity considerably from 8 grains to 7. But we'll check it out when we get into the studio, do some calculations, and put this thing together. But let's finish this last shot. Yeah, that's 415. It's on the screen, so 400 instead of 500. So this will be an interesting thing to see. So we'll go back and work these numbers and see where we go from there, and see how this compares with the 3F varieties that we did. So let's take a look at our first test here. We had 8 grains of 4F Goex, and a 90 grain bullet. Remember, these are the balloon-headed cases, and that gave us an average velocity of 592.4 feet per second. So we threw that into our energy formula, and after squaring our velocity and multiplying by the 90 grain bullet and dividing by our constant, we came up with 70.2 foot-pounds of energy. So in our second test, we had the more modern solid head cases, and I could comfortably fit 7 grains of 4F Goex powder in that solid head case with the 90 grain bullet, and we ended up with the average velocity in that trial of 426.7 feet per second, and we threw that into our energy formula and came up with 36.4 foot-pounds of energy. It's interesting that just 1 grain from of the 4F powder, from 8 grains to 7 grains, resulted in that second trial of just over half the energy of the first trial. And you wouldn't think that 1 grain difference would do that. And so as I was looking at this, I'm thinking more than likely we're looking at a compression issue. And I could have probably fit a little more powder, compressed it a little bit more, that 4F in those solid head cases, and found some different velocity. So multiple tests would really tell, but just 1 grain of powder making that kind of difference just seems a little unlikely. So my guess is there's some work that could be done with several loads and finding that most optimal load. So if we look back to our previous trial with the 3F powder, we're kind of in the same ballpark. We've got 63.4 foot-pounds of energy with that 9 grains of 3F, and we've got 70.2 foot-pounds of energy with the 8 grains of 4F. So I think we're onto something with the 4F powder, and may be able to eke out even a little bit better velocity, and which results in a better energy of that 4F powder in those balloon head cases if I worked a little bit more on that load as well, and maybe a 1/10 of a grain at a time to see how much I could stuff in there and see if that made any difference. So as we've talked about bullet energy and potential penetration and the self-defense effectiveness of a .32 caliber bullet, it reminded me of a story from Teddy Blue Abbott's book, We Pointed 'Em North. And Teddy Blue Abbott was a cowboy from the 1870s that moved cattle from Texas to Montana, then settled in Montana and lived well after 1900, well into the 1930s. And he told a story about getting pneumonia, and he coughed so hard that he said he coughed up a .32 caliber bullet. He never explained how the .32 caliber bullet would have got into his lungs. Obviously he was shot at some point in time, but it did penetrate deep enough to get into his lungs, and obviously he lived through that and then coughed the bullet up when he had pneumonia. It's an interesting book. It really talks about what it was really like moving cows and in the rough and tumble West, and so it's kind of a neat thing to look at. But yeah, that came to mind because of all this work with this .32 caliber gun for self-protection, and Teddy Blue obviously lived through being shot in the lungs with a .32 caliber bullet. Well, regardless of the power of this little .32 Smith and Wesson, it is a lot of fun to shoot, and it's fun to do the reloading process and learn about the capabilities of this particular cartridge. And it certainly is easy to carry. I've got it right here in my vest pocket, and really adds very little weight to your body, and it certainly is a poppy little gun to pull out and would intimidate folks just knowing you were armed. So thank you for following this pocket pistol. I really enjoyed doing it. I appreciate all the comments that you've given us and the ideas that you've given us. It kind of extended the series longer than what I expected, but it's been a lot of fun. So if you liked the video, hit that thumbs up button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button as well. And again today, I just want to thank you for coming. With 4X, or oh darn it. My gun's not falling back down. Well, I tell you what, regardless of the power, are we filming? Yeah. Okay. We were commando free for the longest time.
But not anymore. Those guys are working. Well, they've been right next to us.
Yeah.
Decided to go Black Ops.
Look at this and put it away.
What?
You just spoke in the middle of my scene. Because it's cool.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Now you're laughing.
Okay, go ahead.
And definitely concealable. So I've got it actually inside of a shirt pocket right here in my. So easy to get to. I can't even reach the darn thing. You know, I thought maybe we wouldn't have any bloopers in this one. It's so short.